Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Mid-Tier Thoughts. It's me, Austin, today, going solo. For those of you out there who have been keeping track of all of the awesome gun wins we've been having lately against the ATF and other organizations, those have been awesome things that have been happening because of groups like the Firearms Policy Coalition, Gun Owners of America, other organizations like that. They, however, also receive funding from people like us to do what they do, and they also get it through awesome companies like Blackout Coffee. Blackout Coffee is an awesome company that it not only gives you great coffee, but you can actually support the Firearms Policy Coalition and Gun Owners of America and other similar organizations like the Second Amendment Foundation through your purchase of their marked coffee brands through Blackout Coffee. So check out the link in the description if you want to do that. But that aside, now that I've kind of paid the bills, let's dive into it. So what are we talking about today? I wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive today as things around the world kind of seem to be getting more and more crazy. This is August 4th at the time I am filming this. With that, we have a bunch of stuff going on around the world. The world seems to ever increasingly step closer and closer to World War III. Will it happen anytime soon? Anyone's guess. But if it does, I think there are some questions we need to ask ourselves across the board, not only with that, with election season coming up and kind of the future of our nation and a few things I think that we need to address. So let's just get down to brass tacks here. The question we're going to try to answer today is, what will you fight for? What are you willing to fight for? What are you willing to die for? So this episode is going to be a little bit more of a serious one, but I think it's going to be good for all of us to kind of answer these questions. So obviously, if you're a fan of the podcast, you're probably of the mindset of someone who prepares for things. You like to be a prepared citizen, modern Minuteman, a prepper, whatever you want to call it. And we all have a reason as to why we are that way. Whether that's because we're paranoid, whether it's, you want to be prepared for the future, whether because you feel a calling to do that, whether you want to make sure your family is secure and safe, whatever your reasoning is, we all have a reason as to why we're like that. Maybe some people just find it fun and a good thought experiment. Maybe some people take it more seriously. Maybe more people are of the mind where you see things like the book of Revelations in the Bible and you're like, hey, I want to be prepared for when things like this happen. Or you look at world events and you're like, man, world is scary. I want to make sure that we're good. But there's deeper meanings. There's deeper reasons behind that too. Like those are the reasons why we justify it. But what are the reasons why that we actually do it? What are the things that we actually prepare for? What are the things that we actually train ourselves to fight for, right? Like, sure, we go out and we shoot in for fun. We shoot for fun, and it's good to know, and it's awesome to do flat range stuff on Instagram and things like that. But what are we actually training to fight for, right? I think most people can be summarized into one of three categories, or categories that kind of bleed into each other through some extent. And I think that most of us would say that we're willing to fight and to die for either the love of family, the love of country, or the love of God. For some of us, it's one out of the three or multiple out of the three. For some of us, it is all three at varying levels, bleeding through one way or the other. And I think it's an important question that we all ask ourselves, especially as things in the world seem to get more and more out of control and times seem to get tougher and tougher. For those of my listeners who are in the United States and for those who aren't, I'd be curious to see what my foreign listeners are, if you guys are worried at all about the upcoming election and what your guys' thoughts are on it. For those who are in the States, you know just as well as I do, we have an election coming up this year. I would hope that most of you kind of realize that this is going to be a spicy time between now and the end of the year with whoever gets elected, no matter how it goes. It's going to be a spicy time. It's going to be a rough ride. They've already tried to assassinate President Trump in early July, and that didn't work. So we'll see how spicy things get from there on out. As well as like in world events, we've got the whole Iran-Israel thing going on right now, seeming to step ever closer to war. We've got the U.S. Congress passing a joint resolution, basically calling Iran a threat to national security. And many in the established government have been wanting war with Iran for a long time. And it makes me wonder if maybe this is what they want, right? If they're trying to push for that before the election starts, knowing that if they don't, they probably won't get a war with Iran, but that they want one before the election goes through. So that way, no matter who gets elected, they're stuck with it. We can have another forever war and lead into Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and such, and all the people who pay into that making all their millions. Um, That's just the way I see things, right? So it begs the question, and it begs some hard questions, I think, for a future, such as where do we draw lines and say enough is enough and do stand up like we talk about, like we train for, and what are we willing to fight for? We look at the military right now with epically low recruiting numbers, and people can't figure out why. Like the powers that be can't possibly fathom that, like, they've lost touch with their base, that they don't know what people want. They can't imagine people not wanting to fight for America. And I think, like, we'll kind of analyze each of these things, that the three categories, real quick. And I'm going to start with looking at it from through this lens of people not understanding. They're like, man, why are these young people not wanting to join up? Why do they not want to join the military anymore? Why are people not willing to fight for their country? And I think the thing is with that is when we say that, you know, people can be divided into categories, one of them being love of country. I think that people have to understand that it's the love of what our country should be, the love of what our country is from an idealistic perspective. And I'll explain that a little bit. For me, the love of country is the love of the idea of America, of what it can be, not always what it is. Unfortunately, I think we've seen our nation go through a steady decline. It's been corrupted, it's been abused, um, it's been led by incompetent people for a while, it's been led by traitors for a while. And for a lot of us, I think sometimes it becomes hard to justify love of country when we look at the government. And from the government standard, I agree. Not much love lost there. From the people standard, from what America should be as an idea, from the people who live that idea, from the people who long for that idea of individual liberty, of freedom, of personal responsibility, of personal rights, of the idea that the founders fought for. For those of us, that's what America is. That's the America we hold on to. Whether that be an idealistic dream or an unreal reality, so be it. But that's what we long for, and that's what we're willing to fight for, to stand up for, and potentially die for. I think for most people, especially young people, they're seeing that that's not, however, the reality of the American system that we see today by most standards, and that they're not willing to put their life on the line for that, because what they're seeing, especially, I'm 30, so people, especially people younger than me, they're seeing a nation that erodes their rights, a nation that, you can get in trouble for a calling someone gay or something like that. You can get in trouble for just as much trouble for that as you can any other, any terrible act you could imagine. And that, like, that's something you just can't do. You can't use certain words. You can't say certain things. These are terrible actions, and you're a terrible person for thinking that or doing that. They're seeing a country that's divided politically, where, if you're not in Camp A, then we hate you, and if you're not in Camp B, then we hate you, and you can't speak your mind in the military, and you're going to be forced to get vaccines. And they see this totalitarian stance, and they think to themselves, why would I give my life to that? Like, I don't want to serve that. I don't want to be a part of that. And the government has a hard time trying to figure that out, because I think, they're hoping that we're all looking at nostalgia of what we thought America was, of what we thought America is. They're looking for those World War II lines of people just lining up to defend their country. And the thing is, when your nation is led by and policy set by people who do not identify with its public, who do not identify with the average American, and lead it astray, it's hard to convince somebody at 18 to be like, hey, you should give up your entire future, at least the next 4 years of it, trust us with your life, and go fight and die in a forever war somewhere in the Middle East for Lockheed Martin and Raytheon to make a bunch of money. I think it's with the advent of the internet and a lot of the information that's out there, it's hard to get people to understand. It's hard to get people to, like, not see the truth of the reasons why we go to war anymore, or see the truth of, like, hey, look how bad the military fumbled Afghanistan, and how little care they gave for the 13 people who died in the drawdown of Afghanistan, in the withdrawal. And that young people are like, look, I don't want to be involved in something for the next 20 years that we're just going to abandon. And so I think that's, for a lot of people, it's hard to justify that for what the government says and what the military as a whole looks at as this idea of willing to fight for love of country. For some of us, though, I think more in the mindset of those who follow this podcast, I would say that we would look at that idea of love of country as, again, the idealistic idea. That's funny. The idealistic view of what America can be and what America should be, and that we are willing to fight and die for that. Much like our founding fathers, we are willing to die for the idea of America and the hope that we can change it. The hope that we're not too far gone, that we can change things back to a way that they should be, that we can save it. But for some people, I know people out there, and for some people, and sometimes even myself, you have to wonder, are we too far gone? Are we past the point of no return? Have we lost our sense of identity? And I think that leads to our other two categories, right? Of being able and willing to fight for the love of family and for the love of God. So let's look at the love of family aspect of this. For the love of family, I think most of us would agree that we are willing and able to do anything for our families. That for those of us who have wives or children, or even those who are single, who just have family in general, or even close friends that might as well be family, that I think it's easy for us to realize that yes, we would be willing to do anything for them. But the question comes down to, what does do anything for them look like? For my children, what am I willing to do to ensure their prosperity and their health and their happiness? Am I willing to put my life on the line and risk it for a better future for my children? I think none of us would disagree that we're willing to put our lives down to protect our wives or our husbands and our children, and that is, especially for the men listening, that is our role, is to be a provider and a protector, to lay our life down for those in our family, to defend them, to ensure that they are okay. I don't think anyone would argue that. But I think it's a more complex than just making sure that you can stand in the gap if someone kicks in your door. It's a matter of like, what does fighting for your children look like? What does standing up for them to protect them look like? Does that mean going to PTA meetings and ensuring that they're not being taught crap in the school system? Does that mean making sure that you're standing up for the protecting of children and making sure that the whole trans ideology crap's not getting pushed in schools? Does that mean, what does that mean to you? Does that mean standing up against government policy or against government dictatorships to ensure that they can live a more free people than you were? I think that that's where, some of these questions become kind of hard. It's like, it's easy to say, like, yeah, I'd die for my family, but what does that mean? Like, obviously, like, we all know that, like, yeah, if someone kicks in the door, like, yes, I'd be willing to, take a bullet to save my family. Would you be able and willing to risk your livelihood, to risk your job, to risk your way to provide for your family, to ensure that they can live more free than you? I think we saw a lot of times with COVID that we saw people who chose, like, they were like, look, I gotta be able to feed my kids. I gotta take a shot, or, oh, I gotta do this. I gotta be able to do that. I have to bend the knee because I have to put food on the table. And I understand where people come from with that idea of like, hey, I've got to bend the knee to feed the families. But I think the problem is when you have that mentality, you have the mentality of saying like, look, I'm not going to worry. I'm more worried about the immediate future than I am their freedom. And I think that's the thing, is like, freedom is dangerous. Freedom is scary. Freedom is not full of answers. It's full of questions, and it's not a for sure foregone conclusion that you will be prosperous, or where your next meal will come from. Like, that's the whole nature of freedom. It's the idea of dangerous freedom over peaceful slavery, right? That for those who chose to risk everything to ensure your freedom and the freedom of your children, to not live under medical tyranny with COVID, I applaud you. I applaud every one of you. You guys took a risk and said, look, I don't care. Freedom is scary. I will have my freedom, and I will set the example for my children not to bend the knee over things we do not agree with. And for those of you guys who did that, I applaud you. And I think that we are starting to see more and more people wake up to that idea, and we say that, like, they are willing to fight for their children. And I think that's the biggest thing right now I see, is that with families across the board, We see more and more people standing up. They're standing up against corrupt school systems, corrupt policies, the trans ideology across the board. More and more people are standing up and like, we are not okay with this, and more voices are being heard and more people are starting to stand to protect the future of our children. I see it a lot when it comes to like the LGBTQ stuff of like being, against that in schools and making sure you don't have the drag queen story hours and stuff like that. But where is that for ensuring your children's freedom? Where is that for ensuring that they have more rights as a free man than you did? I think that not only as a father should I ensure that my children are protected and that they are provided for, but that I would hope that they would live a freer existence and a more prosperous existence than the one I had. That they would have more gun rights or more rights, period, than I did. But the rights that I would say have been trampled on, that we would fight to make sure that my children have those rights. I can't, what's that phrase that we plant the seeds of trees of which we'll never sit under the shade of. That we will set the bar and the example for our children, that they will see the kind of people that we are and what we fight for, and they will continue that fight for their children and so on and so forth. That we don't just take things for granted, but we take the fight to whatever entity it is that is trying to rob our children of their inheritance as free men and women. Because that's the way I look at it, right? A government that is slowly stripping away the rights of his people, it is robbing your children of their inheritance as free men and women. It is robbing them of their future. And for us to sit here and just be like, well, I tried, or I didn't do this. Like, you're robbing them of their future by being complicit in it. You're not standing up to protect them in that regard. And I think that that's something that we need to be able to do as men. And, for any women listening, that you guys too, like, I'm sorry if this sounds like it's more centered just towards the guys, but, as guys, I think that a lot of times, unfortunately, our wives or mothers or whoever the female lead is in our life are having to pick up the slack because we're not doing our job as men, as providers and protectors, because we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. That's just, I'm calling myself out as much as I am everybody else. So, don't think I'm hating on dudes. But with that as well, I think that kind of blends pretty well into leading into our next subject of, being able and willing to stand up for the love of God, right? So like we talked about, fighting for the love of family, fighting for the love of your country, now talking about the fighting for the love of your God. Right? And when I say this, I mean, basically whatever you hold to as your personal system of beliefs, right? For me, I'm a Christian. I know I don't always, I'm not always the best ambassador of it on here. And I will say I have been trying to watch my language on some of the last couple episodes, because I do feel like that is something I've been convicted on a little bit. Try not to swear as much. But the principles by which you live by, the things by which you value, the morals by which you hold, we all in theory have a line that we say, this is a line that we will not let anyone cross. That if this line is crossed, like that's it. We're going to blows. And I think for some people, for everybody, that line is different. But I think, like, recently, think about like the Olympics, the opening ceremony of the Olympics. I think it was one of the best, worst things that could have happened. I think it was, I mean, like, by that, I do not support what they did, but I think by them doing it so openly, mocking the Last Supper in the way that they did, in such a satanic and evil way, that it opened the eyes of so many people to the reality of the world that we are facing, to the reality of the situation on the ground. A lot of people, I think, that denied where that we are at culturally saw that and were like, holy crap, how could this ever have flown by? Like, who agreed with this? And I think it's been really encouraging to see, people of across the board in faith come out and be like, this is not okay. This is not okay. And I think that that's the thing we have to ask ourselves is, like, what personal values, what personal beliefs, at what point do you feel that you're like, this is enough, we will have no more, and I will take my stand and fight however that looks like, whether that be physical, spiritual, mentally, fighting in legislation, whatever, right? I think we all have to ask ourselves, where we fall with those three categories of, like, love of country, love of family, love of God. Some people, I would say, like, they don't have a family, so that doesn't necessarily fall into it. They're not big fans of the United States right now, so they're not willing to die for that, but they are willing to die for their personal belief system. They're willing to die for their God, whatever that idea is. And there are certain values that they hold so dear that they will not let them go without a fight. And the question I would have with that too is at what line is that it's crossed that you say enough is enough? Now I do need to segue real quick here and say I am not advocating for anybody to become violent or to radicalize anybody or to convince anyone to do anything that would cause someone harm. But I think all of us need to ask ourselves at what point that we see the system going the way that it is that we say it's not working anymore. At what point do we say I'm done? I'm not doing this anymore. And we make a stand, whatever that may look like, whether that's be on the family front, and that mean I'm not doing this anymore, and I'm going to homeschool my kids, and I'm going to make sure that they're raised up right, and I'm not going to promote this stupid crap to my family that society wants me to keep pulling, and I'm going to make sure that my family is squared away, they are prepared, their mindset is ready, and they're made right with whichever God I worship. Whether that means that for the love of family that we look at, for love of country that we look at it and say, I love my country and I will not let it continue to fall into decline. And I will do everything in my power to ensure that we are a prosperous and a peaceful nation that's not getting dragged into forever wars, that's not getting stupid crap promoted across the board that's detrimental to our country, but that we are looking out for our people. Whether that be, I will not sit here and stand idly by as the world turns to darkness into evil, but for the love of my God, I will stand up and I will preach whatever gospel I believe, and I will preach the truth of whatever I believe, and I will ensure that, I'm doing my part as a follower of my faith to ensure that I'm doing my part as a follower of my faith to ensure that the world improves in some way, that I make the world a better place. I think those are the things that we all have to ask ourselves. Like, where are those lines at? What is it that we fight for? What is it that we are willing to die for, right? Are you willing to die for any of those things, right? Maybe you're not. Maybe there's something else that you are, and maybe you're not willing to die for anything. And I think these are hard questions. These are things that are deep and personal questions that are really hard to answer sometimes. They're things that get to the core of who you are, and then sometimes answering those questions reveal uncomfortable truths. Maybe you're not willing to die for those things. Maybe you are willing to let a lot of things slide before you stand up. Maybe you're not willing to stand up. Maybe whether that's a personal belief or a faith-based system that leads you to believe that, or maybe you just don't want to. You don't care, or it's just not in you. You know, it's better to ask those questions now and to get those answers now than to wait until something happens and people are relying on you to know. And that's the thing, is like, you need to be realistic about it, right? If you're doing a lot of the training and a lot of the things we talk about because it's fun or it's a fun thought experiment, but you don't actually want to deal with anything like this in real life, so be it. Be honest about it with yourself. Be honest about it with other people. Know where you are, where you stand, right? I'm not trying to call anybody a coward. I'm not trying to shame anybody. But if that's your personality, that's who you are, that you're like, I'm good. I don't want to stand for any of this. I don't want to fight. I don't want to do any of that, right? No one wants to fight, right? I would agree. I would think most of us on here, none of us are begging for a fight. I think I would say that most of us on here have the mentality that should one come, so be it, and we'll be ready for it. And that's the whole point of why we prepare. But none of us are sitting at home being like, hell yeah, I hope a civil war breaks out so I can start shooting motherfuckers. There I go swearing again. Sorry about that. But, I don't think that that's the reality for most people. I think most of us, we dread that because we know the reality of what that situation brings and that it's a very negative thing. And it's not good at all across the board. But I think for a lot of us, we have to ask ourselves, are you willing to die for anything? And if so, what? What are you willing to live for? What are you willing to die for? And what does that look like? What are you willing to go do? For a lot of people, I know there's a lot of keyboard warriors, a lot of dudes, oh, I do this, or oh, they do that, come for my guns, I'll stand at the doorway, guns are ready. And I appreciate that sentiment, but I think for a lot of people that's not reality, and it's a lot of big internet talk. And that for a lot of people, you say, hey, when the ATF's at my doorway, I'm going out guns a-blazing until they knock at the and, you've got a wife and 2 kids, and you're not about ready to become the next David Koresh, or the next Randy Weaver. I think, there's a lot of things like that where there are people talk a big game. I'm guilty of it with certain things for sure. We all are. But I think deep down, we all have to ask ourselves and get right with whatever belief system we hold to, get right with your God, get right with your mind, get right with your family, and ask those questions because I think we are approaching a time in the near future where some of those questions might become reality of what are you willing to do to defend your family, your country, and your beliefs? Are you willing to die for them? We're all willing to live for them, but are you willing to die for them? And what does that look like to die for them? Does that mean, I don't mean like just run headstrong into the first thing you see to be like, I'm protecting my family, bam, run into a bullet. Obviously be smart about this stuff, be prepared, right? Train, stock up food and water, prepare yourself as best you can. But realistically, again, what will you do and when will you do it? What is the line in your head that has to be crossed for you to act? What acts will you do when that line gets crossed? Are there multiple lines, right, that require different responses? I think that's a reasonable mindset to have. Is like, hey, if this line gets crossed, I have a fairly peaceful response for this because it's a low-level line. Like let's say for example, you're one of the guys who, um, you know, you're like, hey, look, if they come for my guns, I'll fight them at the doorstep. Well, why wait to get to that point, right? Like, why not take every step available beforehand? Why not be like, hey, if they go to pass this thing, I'm gonna get out and I'm gonna do everything I can to prevent that from passing. To prevent this legislation from passing. Do whatever I can to stop it. That's a low level line to where you're like, hey, I have a line that's been crossed. I can do a low level thing against it. Why jump immediately to, hey, if they come from our guns, I'm just going to start shooting people? Like, why not try to stop it beforehand? Why not put all of your effort into preventing that from happening? Because the thing is, I think a lot of us look at it and we're like, oh, we're just waiting for the extreme thing to happen. When they do the extreme thing, I'll be extreme back. But the thing is, they're not being extreme. I mean, they are, but they're doing it in small increments because they know, like, hey, look, if I come for everything all at once, these people, there's enough crazy people out there. They'll do something crazy, and then we have a justification for it, and we can do crazy back. So instead, they nickel and dime us. They take our rights a little bit at a time, one or two here, one or two there, slowly over time, because they know it'll take us years and years to get them back. Look at the brace band thing; it took several years, to get all that squared away, right? Or at least, I mean, it took like a year and a half, 2 years, something like that, to get all that squared away, right? Um, Look at all the, look at the bump stock thing. Like, we're just now getting those back. That was under Trump that thing started to come back. And that's just with some simple gun rights, not including much bigger issues. So I think the real thing comes down to, like, what are you willing to do to defend the things that you love? And are the things that you love, like, what priority are they in? Are there different levels of how you might respond to different things being threatened? Though maybe the way that you would respond to your family being threatened is different than the way you're to your country or to your God or your belief system being threatened. You need to ask yourselves these hard questions, I think, and really sit down with yourself and say, where am I at on this? Where am I at when it comes to the things I hold dear and what I'm willing to fight for? And what does that fight look like? Does it have to immediately always be going to blows and direct physical confrontation? Are there things I can do that can prevent the fight in the first place? Other things I can do that are not just immediately going out and starting World War III or starting the next Civil War to get about the results that I want. How can I fight at every level, right? How can I, like, protecting your family is a simple thing. It's like, you can promote local policies, community, certain things in your community, PTA meetings, like simple, basic things, voting in local elections, small stuff that would ensure the rights and protections of your family that don't involve you immediately rushing headfirst into, like, some dude kicking down your door or fighting the wolves at the, at the porch. You can do these things to fight for your family and being there for your family and being a strong role model and being a good father and being a good husband and being a good son and doing all these things to fight for your family in ways that don't require you just to lock and load and go out and start shooting people. Like, obviously, we train to be prepared for that, but do we train and put as much dedication into all of the other aspects of what that means? Same thing goes for fighting for your country. Are there ways that we can fight for our country that don't involve literally putting on our load-bearing kit, going out into the woods, and start shooting redcoats? What can we do before we ever step to that point? Should we be prepared for that? Absolutely. I'm not saying negate your capabilities or negate your responsibility there, but what can you do to prevent that from happening in the first place? And what ways can you fight to prevent that from ever becoming a thing, right? Why reduce yourself to having to fight tyranny head on if you can reduce it from ever becoming a problem? Same thing for your belief systems, right? A lot of us I know that hold to a Christian faith felt directly attacked and insulted after the whole idea of the Summer Olympics opening. But ask yourself, what can we do to change our culture, to change our country, to change the mindsets of people? If you are a Christian and you hold to that belief system, what can you do, right? Who can you reach? How can you spread the gospel in a way that prevents that kind of stuff and that kind of thinking from happening? Is it going to, are you going to be able to do that all the time? Absolutely not, right? But how can you promote a culture that would never even respect the idea of dishonoring the Last Supper in that way, or dishonoring the Christian religion in that way? You can do that by trying to spread the good news, spread the gospel, going out and reaching people, and changing the ideology of the very people that are in the country that would do something like that, to change the very culture to where it wouldn't be accepted, but to make it to where everyone is like, maybe they're not adhering to the religion, but the ideas of that religion, or the ideas of the philosophies behind it, and the idea of goodwill to all, and that kind of thing, become so ingrained in the culture because of the way that you are going out and living your life and spreading your good news, that they don't even consider that as an option. There are ways to fight that don't immediately resolve to the gunfighting. So like I said, this one was going to be a little bit different of a topic today, but I felt like I really had to get out here and address this and have people kind of really deep dive into who you are as a person and what you believe and why you believe it. So with that being said, guys, I think I've asked a lot of questions for us. I'm sorry if this sounded a little repetitive, kind of off the cuff here, but yeah, I think that really we do need to do a little bit of analyzation and realize where we're at, where we are on the timeline of events in the world, and where we feel like we need to be, and what we're willing to say. Like, where in that timeline are you willing to say, there's my line, I will not let be crossed. That is the line where I say enough is enough, right? And I do something about it. I think that's a tough question to ask for a lot of us, and I think it's one that we need to honestly get right with ourselves, and be honest with ourselves, and get right with our families. Make sure we're all on the same page. Because I can tell you right now, if you're married or you've got a long-term relationship or whatever, and you and your significant other are not on the same page with that, it is not going to go the way you think. So make sure you guys are on the same page with your whole family. Make sure you're settled between, everything is settled between you and your significant other and your family members, your belief system, and whatever truths that you hold dear. I think we all kind of see writing on the wall and think that, in the near future, there's going to be some trouble, and there's going to be some troubling times that it's going to really analyze who we are. What's that old saying that these are the times that try men's souls? I think that we are quickly approaching some time like that, where we are going to have to ask ourselves some very hard questions as free men and women as to what we are willing to do to ensure that freedom for our family, our nation, and our belief system. So with that, guys, though, I'll leave you on that depressing note, and have a good one. If you haven't checked it out already, www.midtierthoughts.com. Check it out. I will see you on the next one. Hopefully by then we will have a happier subject. Peace.